So, at the start of this Learning Disability Awareness Week 2026, it's a real delight to spend time with Anna Park and Sue Blackwell. So, Anna, let's just start with you. What interests you about Learning Disability Awareness Week?
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here. And yes, it's the theme of this year's Learning Disability Awareness Week. I think is really spot on. The see me, hear me, value me, because I think visibility is so important. And so often people have led lives that have been away from the spotlight, families have had stigma. And I just think, although we're making progress, we're not making enough progress. So I think my life has always been about putting people where they want to be, finding their passions, supporting people to follow their bliss, actually, and particularly for me in music and dance, that's really been where I've been supporting people, making instruments that are accessible and giving people those opportunities to create, rather than being passive recipients of entertainment or workshops. And I just think we need to move away from that, especially even I worked in sensory rooms as well, and I found people were sitting looking at bubble tubes and having these experiences done to them, and yet there was no sense of being in control and having a choice and a voice. So I think see me, hear me, value me is a hugely important topic, and yeah, I fully support it.
Likewise, a pleasure to be here. And what brings me to the table? Well, fundamental in my experience of life is what drives me. And even before Jem was born, I was very much driven by the belief that all humans are equal, and some get more notice taken of them than the others. It can be those who shout the loudest, or it can be those who are drivers in their particular sphere, but rarely is it people with a learning disability who all too often are marginalised. They are put out of sight and out of mind, and that's wrong. It's just a travesty. It cannot be right. And if we actually do believe in equity, if we believe in social justice, if we believe in EDI, dare I say, how many people are ticking the box for EDI, and do they actually know what they're doing? And all of these things are flavors of the month, and people want to be seen to be doing the right thing, but actually are they being properly inclusive? So when Jen was born, this became real for me. Jen has Down syndrome. She was a total shock, I have to say. There was no warning whatsoever. But she was born into, or we became a family who were absolutely committed to equity and to social justice for all. So then we were called upon to put that into action in order that Jen could be supported to be her own person. Little did we know what that journey would entail, or where it would lead us, or the connections it would make for us, or the opportunities that it would open. But one way and another, it's also allowed us to develop and to become our own people by putting Jen's needs, by having Jen's needs met. Then that allows us as her parents to be free and to be our own people and to do what we choose to do with our lives.
I'm Tracey-Jane, known as TJ, and I've been working with and alongside Sue and Jen Blackwell and Malcolm Blackwell for a couple of years. And I had no previous experience of people with learning disability up until that point. So my world and my life has been really changed by this experience of getting to know the possibilities of people with learning disabilities that I just had no awareness of previously. Anna, you've clearly worked with people with learning disabilities. Sue, you've lived it, but a lot of us don't have that experience at all. Can you both just give some example of where people are seen and valued and heard?
Well, I think it's really good now that organisations have spokespeople that they never had before. There was always somebody talking on behalf of somebody with a learning disability. And I think that's one of the definite changes that I've seen, that people are now having a voice, and are being, understood that they can have a role within an organisation. and that they have something that they have that's worth saying and need to be listened to. And I think it's people like Jen that are showing that you can have the microphone and you have got something worth saying and people should be listening. And then it's not just equality, it has to be equity. We will have to be making adjustments to make sure people can speak, even if it's not verbally, that we know that Makaton is now far more accepted broadly, and that, beyond words, books are now being used and more accessible so people can access healthcare. We need longer longer health appointments so people can actually talk about or find out the root cause of some pain they're in. I think all of those things are the good things that are happening. And Baroness Hollins and wonderful heroes like that are making those cases and making sure that we make and implement those changes are some of the positives that are happening. I worked with Widget many years ago when it was in its infancy to get symbols established. In fact, there's a book that we helped to be part of where we were using symbols on a timetable so people could make an informed choice about what they wanted to do in the day centre where I worked, rather than being told you're doing living skills this morning. It was actually something that could be read and understood, and for somebody that didn't have the intellectual capacity to read. And we did the first emails with pen pals across the world back in the early 90s. We were one of the first day centres to have a computer. So there was a lot of pioneering stuff that happened there that's more mainstream now, that is fantastic to see. And I think that being a citizen of the world is something that I can see that's happening more, and we just need to do more of it, really.
So I can't help but immediately think back to what I call the 10 years in the wilderness, when we were looking for the opportunities for Jen to develop her passion. So Jen always was very, very clear what she wanted to do with her life. She wanted to be a dance leader, and she wanted to be a dancer, which is to say she wanted to make choreography and she wanted to perform that choreography on stages, neither of which were recognised as being, if you like, bona fide careers for somebody with a learning disability. But Jen was so clear about it, and she has never deviated from her focus. So whilst I talk about the 10 years in the wilderness, and it really was, we were turning over stones, we were visiting, we were networking, we were writing letters, we were having phone calls, we were just doing anything and everything we could to find out what was out there and where that possibility was for her to train to be the dancer and dance teacher, dance leader that she wanted to be. And we came up empty-handed. It was just like, well, we don't have the right thing for you fundamentally because she has a learning disability. And that learning disability is just an integral part of Jen's makeup. It's who she is. It's just, if you meet Jen, you meet learning disability as well. But we don't sort of labour it. It's just an integral part of her. And so after trying and finding no avenues that worked for her, which is not to say there wasn't any training, but there wasn't any training which could meet her needs. So it also needed to be training which she found accessible, training with the right support for her, training in using the right terminology and giving enough space and time for her to be able to digest it and internalize it and respond to it and be able to embrace it. So that kind of comes out to, if you're the teacher, do you actually have the skills that it takes in order to be able to connect with the person that you're teaching the learning to? Not do you know your subject, and not can you not tell your subject and write it down, but do you have the skills necessary in order for that your knowledge to become transferable or translatable by somebody who has a learning disability? And that's a big ask for any teacher. That's a big ask for any parent. It becomes an incredible ask. And so I often talk about needing a degree in psychology as a parent of a person with a learning disability. I think you do deserve that over time, because you become very skilled at reading them and understanding them, and it's almost like reading a foreign language at times. But because you know Jen so well, and she will interchange words and use them in ways that Joe Public really doesn't understand, but he thinks he understands because he knows the words. So it can get really confusing. But anyway, after being empty-handed for those 10 years, we then just decided in the end to do it our own way. And that led to the setting up of DanceSyndrome, which still exists to this day and is going from strength to strength, I'm delighted to say. So set up in 2009, it became a charity in 2013, and we are are doing the most incredible work in a very broad spectrum of places with learning disabled dance leaders as our USP. So if there is not a dancer with a learning disability who can attend a conference or is involved in a choreography or is able to leave a workshop, then Dance Syndrome cannot deliver for that event. So the dance leader with learning disabilities works alongside a non-disabled dance artist, and together they co-produce everything. So whether that's workshops or performances or conference presentations. And so they are very, very definitely not only, if you like, in the lead and under the spotlight, but in all of the back work that goes on. So all of the preparation side of things, some in the admin of the organisation, others sit on the board of Dance Syndrome. So people with a learning disability are visible and proactive throughout the entirety of the organisation.
Have you seen that, sort of the type of
Probably
thing that
not the
Dance
level of
Syndrome does?
representation and visibility, I think. I think
Okay.
it's that's definitely the USP. I mean, I'm sure it's happening. I'm still a learning disability advisor for NAPA, which are the National Activity Providers Association, and that includes technology as well. And my background is I worked as a day services social worker in a day centre, and that was teaching living skills, IT, creating a magazine that was created co-production very much, and that again is 25 years ago now. So we were in the early days of making things happen and finding a voice. But I think more in recent years, it is happening in other organisations, but probably not ones that I've had as much contact with. But I've worked with people like Joanna Grace, who's doing fantastic work. I don't know if you're aware of her. She works very much with people with profound and multiple learning disabilities, with the sensory story work. And I found that particularly validating, that now really understanding that, if somebody hasn't got the verbal skills, their value of their life is worth just as much, and they have something to contribute. And I think often parents with a child with a learning disability feel that they're having something special revealed to them, and that their life has become enriched. And I think it's that removal away from it being a stigma to actually it being something incredibly transforming, and actually appreciating life in a way that maybe without having had that child, it would have been emptier in many ways. And I think I've met so many parents that have said that they felt, before maybe they had a life that was very much based on financial success or status or hierarchy or, material things. And suddenly it's all about creativity and passion and sharing, this understanding the importance of family and love and nature and all of those things. So I think, yes, that's where I've seen it, and I think it's just so important that people recognize everybody's value, innate value, and that we've still got stigma to remove. It's a great shame, but it's still very much there. And Jen is a real trailblazer, showing what can be done. All those business awards and the British Empire Medal, and it's staggering, but it's so. But she's just doing such a wonderful job, and for people, for having a role model like Jen for people to aspire to, she's just the changes that she's making for people that she have no idea of the ripple effect. It is huge to see somebody in her position, and being a voice for many. And I just know that's having such an incredible effect on so many people. Absolutely. So yeah,
It's really kind.
No,
Yeah,
it was
it's
a real
really
privilege
kind.
to interview Jen and write that article a few years ago on behalf of NAPA. But yeah, absolutely in awe of all that she does and is. Yes.
Right, it's really kind that you refer to the accolades that she's picked up along the way. I mean, whoever could have seen an honorary doctorate coming her way? It is just beyond extraordinary, but fabulous as well. So it all comes down to those connections, to, I suppose, being in the right place at the right time, and for people with the eyes and the ears to be able to see and to recognize the enormity of what she is doing and trailblazing for, and the pioneering, groundbreaking work that DanceSyndrome does if you like, following along with the idea that people with a learning disability need to have the opportunities to lead from the front. And that's just proven to be so powerful, and has proven to be something that so many people have been looking for but couldn't find because the system isn't ready to do that. But what I was also going to comment on was your comment about giving them that voice to be heard, and the creativity that comes from our dance leaders is phenomenal. With ideas that the rest of us could never conjure up. It's just like, and why, but why not? It's about giving that opportunity for people to be heard and to be valued and to be recognised as having a valid part to play in life. Not only in the dance field or any other field, but just throughout life, for their views and values to be heard and to be acted upon. And I think there's nothing more powerful than somebody who has been marginalised to actually find all of a sudden they have a voice and they are listened to, and they are connected and they have other people around them who are listening to them. It's not only Down syndrome, it's others in the space, and that is beyond incredible. And I think a part of Jen's well-being is about being in demand, about being valued, about being wanted, about being respected for being the person that she is. And no less than, or no more than, when she was recently in Florida, in Tampa Bay, invited to go and contribute to a conference, which she was absolutely delighted to do, just on cloud nine. It was just like, oh well, this whole group of people want to hear from me, and this is the way I'm going to address them. I mean, she's, her field is dance, and that's how she goes about life. And she had them hooked. They were eating out of the palm of her hand, and absolutely bowled over. As part of the feedback afterwards said, it was the seismic moment of that conference. I mean, what incredible feedback to receive, but so powerful. So we need to give everyone that we can that voice, to be heard, to be recognised, to be valued, to be seen, to be their own person, and give and delve deep in order to unlock the nugget of gold which is within every single person, learning disabled or not. That nugget of gold exists, but for a person with a learning disability, they need support to be able to unlock it and to find the talent that lies within.
Absolutely. You mentioned organisations before, TJ, and I'm thinking of some of the advocacy organisations that I've worked with, thinking of People First, and there's a local one here called Power, People of Hearts Want Equal Rights. And I think sometimes even having an organisation to support you to get your voice out there, I think that's been a big change as well. Because I've seen from the early grassroots days of those groups, they have grown, and they have a good presence online now as well. And I think they're important groups to be aware of, so that people can find the right support. And now that's always Jen's mantra as well, isn't it? That finding the right support, you can fly. And that's exactly what she's shown. It needs to be the right support, and it mustn't be infantilizing, and it mustn't be patronizing or tokenistic. It has to be recognizing the person, and like you say, finding that nugget within. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
And I think through both of your experiences, you're both using creativity and music, and in Jen's case, dance, to support people, to help people connect with themselves and find that joy.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's been a summary of my work, really, using music to release joy. I'd say I taught one of the first circle dance sessions in a day centre back in '95, I think, is when I first started teaching circle dancing, and that was music from around the world that I then found, although I started to teach the dances as they were, I noticed that people were starting to choreograph their own moves to these wonderful pieces of world music, and then we actually ended up with our own set of completely newly choreographed dances with, and I would give them the name of the person that came up with the steps. And it was just so wonderful to see this innate creativity given a lease of life just from playing a piece of music and showing a few moves, and then allowing the group to come up with their own and think, actually, no, when I hear this music, I want to do this, and we've had some fantastic and some hilarious dancers as well that were just wonderful, and to be able to share those and actually give people that chance to create. There's nothing more powerful. I really honestly believe that. Before the word co-production was even around, that's what we were doing. Everything was a given. Everyone was contributing and valued, and yes, it just felt like a really creative space. And I was so lucky to have the freedom to run whatever groups I wanted based on what people's interests were, and that's why it worked. And although I was told you must keep that professional distance, they are your clients. The word client never felt right for me. They became my friends. Many of them still are my friends, and we were equal people. And I was, yeah, when that started to be pushed, you keep your professional hat on. It started to be a disconnect for me because I just, we felt a bit like a family, and I knew it wasn't right to have that sense of, you mustn't get close. Like this doesn't work unless we're close. Yeah. So that was really key for me, definitely.
Over the years, there have been just different party numbers that fundamentally she just pours her heart into. She wears her heart on her sleeve, and when you're making that music or when you're witnessing that dance or when she's leading that dance, that this is the authentic person you're seeing. You're not seeing any sort of flannel that we want the world to see. You are seeing the person, and you're seeing deep into their soul. And I think that's something that the rest of us don't bring to the table because we don't know how to. We wear so many protective layers. That means that the people just don't see deeply into our souls apart from our other halves, maybe, and well, hopefully. I think that's a unique quality for people with a learning disability, and something that we should treasure and should value and should really, really respect, and enable and empower them to absolutely maximize their persona. And it's interesting, more recently I've become more and more aware of not only that we are human beings, yes, we are human beings, but that before we can have effective connections with other members of the human race, that we actually do need to be connected to ourselves, and we need to take the time and the trouble to connect to ourselves. And I feel I know who I am, and I feel I can connect with other human beings. But for a person with a learning disability, they actually don't know who they are. As far as they are concerned, the rest of the world sees them as a learning disability, not as Jen or as Paul or Peter or Becky or whoever. And which is the more important element here, the fact that you happen to have a learning disability or the fact that you're a human being? And obviously for me it's the latter. But I do think that we, the rest of society, have got so much to learn from every person with a learning disability.
Yes, totally agree. We're still very much an appearance-based society, aren't we? We just judge so quickly, and so don't look beneath the surface. Yeah, it has to change.
Well, and people like you are helping with that change, in the different ways. Even, talking today, it's raising that awareness that there are things that we can all do to see and hear and value people with learning disabilities. What would your recommendations be for people like me that don't have any experience of people with learning disabilities to be able to see and hear and value them in a way that they currently aren't?
I think it's not making assumptions, and taking the time to really listen and learn about the person, and not, yes, just not jump to conclusions about what their likes are or their history, cultural background, personality. Everybody's uniquely different. And I think we fall into a trap when we say they, quite often, they and them, because no one's a homogenous blob. We're all uniquely different. And I think often we do fall into that trap, because I think that can hinder us getting to know somebody as soon as we say they're one of them, because that creates the whole feeling of othering. And although there are going to be elements that are shared experiences, as in everyone has probably experienced some kind of negative discrimination or a lack of opportunity, a lack of access. All those things do unite people with learning disabilities, but we must be careful to not put people under an umbrella and say, oh, you're one of those. You have that type of personality. I think that is my biggest recommendation, is to take a step back and think, no, you are a unique human being, and you're going to be very different from the next person. And yeah, to not make assumptions. I think I would say that's the biggest thing that I've learned. Yeah,
I would suggest that you are aware that, and just to underline that every person is an individual, and every person needs to be approached as an individual, finding that nugget of gold. And you can cross the road, it's just like you see somebody, you see them every day, you see them every week, whatever that frequency, and they go on their way and you go on their way, you go on your way. But do you ever take the time to go and say hello and recognize that behind every person with a learning disability is a family or a carer or somebody who is going on that journey with them, and that somebody may well be hurting themselves, and there may well be things that you can bring to the table, because as human beings we all have things in common as well. We all need to live and to breathe, and that takes food and time and outdoors. So we have a lot in common. In fact, we have more in common, way more in common than we ever have, which is not shared by us. But I think if crossing the road is difficult, and I can absolutely concur with that, it can be very difficult, especially when somebody presents in a totally different way to anything that you are otherwise aware of. Then, as Anna says, there are opportunities to go and volunteer, to go and spend time at places where you might find people with a learning disability. There are opportunities in the case of DanceSyndrome to go to performances, to go to workshops, which are open to every person. So there are different ways to connect with people, and depending on who you are and depending on where your comfort zone is. But if you truly do care and you make that right connection, that person will become probably your best friend for the whole of the rest of your life, because you would have found something really special and valuable within them, and they will be journeying with you along by their side.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's more that unites us than divides us, and I think that's an important thing to always remember, definitely, and get past that fear of, well, I'm not sure how to talk to that person, or have I got the skills to communicate? Maybe they'll take it the wrong way. And yeah, it is about understanding that it's a two-way thing, and you've got so much to gain as well as to give. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is, don't be afraid to step out. Don't be afraid to take that step, and don't be afraid to speak and connect and be open. And I think if you do it with the intention of openness and curiosity, even if a word isn't understood or doesn't land quite right, the intention is for understanding and connection. So it will always land right if the intention is right, in my personal experience.
And it's difficult, isn't it? Because we're all so busy. We're all running ragged. We're running here, we're running there. We've got meetings there. We've got family commitments. We've got every commitment under the sun. How do you make time for people with a learning disability if you don't actually have the necessity to have to find that time? And that's a real conundrum. That because we're time impoverished. So you have to actually believe that crossing the road, making that time, is actually something that you, as a member of the public, actually need to do or want to do, because less than 2% of people in the world have a learning disability. In the UK, the figure is 1.5 million, with another 700,000 not learning disabled enough to be within that 1.5 million. But that's still a heck of a lot of people. There will still be people with learning disabilities who live in your environment and who are known to you, your neighbourhood perhaps. And so they will exist. Apologies. But there will be people who you can find, who you can connect with, or organisations who are empowering people with a learning disability to be heard. So it depends on you, Joe Public, to decide whether that 2% of the population is worth making the effort for, or whether you're just going to ignore them and carry on with your life, putting your bread and butter on the table and looking after your own family.
I'll tell a quick little story. Something happened to me a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was when my husband was in hospital in Hammersmith. I was going through the park and I wasn't sure which exit from the park to take. And I saw a lady with a daughter with her. And it was only as I approached I realised the daughter had Down syndrome. And I saw the lady flinch as if to say, "Oh, and I don't know whether I want you to approach me," because she'd obviously had bad. But I thought, no, I need to make this happen. And I had the most one. Ended up being late actually because we stood there chatting for about 15 minutes. Her daughter was such an effusive person and had so much to say herself, and the mum then looked so relieved that I'd obviously approached and wasn't scared, or you can't you don't always know what people are thinking, and she had her jeep on as well, so I think she had that extra fear of any discrimination. But it really actually transformed my day. I'd gone in thinking, oh, hope my husband's okay, and then had this lovely encounter in the park that just made my day start so much better. So yes, I honestly can recommend just making those moments happen. I mean, in my 20s, I worked in a MenCap, what's called a group home then, and just the things that they got wrong then. This poor chap, whose name was Michael, and he had this wonderful tin of die-cast Matchbox toys, which he loved, and he would rock and he would look through the windows and just, I always thought he must be having flights of fancy, just imagining himself in that car. It was so important to him. And the directive came from head office that, you've got to be age appropriate. And this staff team interpreted that as we must hide his cars. And they put them in the top of a cupboard. And he knew where they were. And he would just shake the cupboard, and it was awful. And I used to go, I was the newest member of staff. But every time I was on duty, I got that tin of toy cars out and gave them back to him because I knew they were important for him. So I think there's been so many mistakes, and I learned that way as well, knowing in my heart that it was wrong. And I just knew that, oh, we're treating them like adults. You don't understand yet, but you will when you're older, Anna. You'll get it. And it's like, no, this isn't right. This definitely isn't right. So I think, yes, I have lived through some times where, yeah, I would go back now and really, I mean, I did try and fight my corner, but I was not the person with the years behind me, and I was being told that this wasn't right, that we mustn't treat people who are adults as children trapped in adult bodies. And so we're not doing that. This is something that's a passion for somebody, in the same way that the chap across the road has got train sets in his garage. And so yeah, I think it's about, yeah, not making those mistakes. That became learning curves for me, about respecting the individual and their choices, and not imposing what we think is right, and saying, you will have this, you won't have that, because it's a form of control, and it's a form of abuse. It really is, taking away somebody's possession under the heading of it not being right for them to have it. It's, yeah, it is.
Yeah, and then if I just relate that to Jen, there were years where I almost accused her of having a Peter Pan complex. It's just like, well, this dance is all very interesting, but that's kind of what youngsters do. And, I don't think I ever sort of said that to her, but in my mind, I absolutely thought, there would be a point where she outgrew it. But she absolutely showed me the error of my ways and told me in no uncertain terms, I mean, not necessarily verbally, but through her body language, that this was important and this was her future. And then she coined her phrase that none of us will ever forget, I have the right to a life of my choosing. My future lies in dance. She could not have been clearer, or given us more of a steer, if you like, or a requirement to actually deliver for her and find ways and means for her to actually become that dance leader she craved to be. And was she right? And watching her lead her first workshop was one of those moments I shall never forget. It was absolutely eye-opening. It was at that moment that I kind of went, yeah, okay, so I get it, I understand it. You know, you really, really, really do need to live this life. This is right for you. You know, I can see it in the sparkle in your eyes and in your actions and in your connections, and you know, all of those things that are part of telling you how a person is responding to a situation that they're in. And once you see that, you can't ignore it. You've got to run with it. You've got to find ways to support it, and you've got to empower any person to be their own person, and particularly those who are not able to advocate for themselves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your contributions and sharing and stories and support, and for all that you both do in raising awareness and helping people like me to see, value, and hear people with learning disabilities.
Thank you, TJ. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. Good to be here.